Okay, I'd like to call this finance meeting to order. The first item we have is assignment for requests for council action. We have 1986 budget amendments, 1988 fiscal year 19 CDBG allocation grant application, 1989 request to rezone 216, 222, and 226 South Jefferson Street from an R3 to an MU. 1990 MCRC program and activity rate change proposal. 1991 amendment number 11 to Delta Airport Consultants North Detention Basin. 1992 accept ODOT resolution regarding zoning requirements for State Route 18 project. And 1993 increase PO 2019-513 to Ohio Rail Development Corp. Fiscal year 2017 CHIP. And for special legislation, we have 1994 amending codified ordinance regarding building demolition. Next item we have is motion to approve the MCRC sponsorships. Mr. Wright, you got that?
Thank you, Mr. President. So these are the two ads for this approved. I need approved for this. The first one, the Howard Hanna, is the back of the ID cards. So the membership cards, as we print them, this will be on the back already. So what will happen is that company will pay for all these cards to be printed. We'll get those cards for free, and then we'll print those off on our membership cards on the front. The next one is Dynamerica, and these are for the second set of the pad rails on the track that go around the track, all the railings. These are pads that are up and down. The first batch was Howard Hanna too.
Question, when you say they're gonna pay for all the cards plus pay $2,000 on top of that?
It'll be part of their, part of their cost. So part of that $2,000 is the cost to have this printed. But
And how much does it cost to print the cards?
So we won't have to buy the cards. We normally have to.
And how much is that?
About 34 cents a card.
How many cards will there be?
1,000.
Okay, just 1,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
So once they hit 1,000, then there will be no more to print out, and they can go to the next sponsor or however they want to do it.
Now, this is something, we never did this before, because this is a little different than the,
This is new, but it's in the brochure revision that you guys approved back on January 28th in the
but
finance meeting.
this is the first time we're doing it on the.
Yep. First time we
Okay.
sold one.
Okay, any questions?
I'm going to need to abstain since this school's good.
Move to approve. Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
The next item we have is 19086 budget amendments. We have 2019 airport stormwater detention basin.
There will be a request for an advance for this at the next meeting.
And this is just for the engineering of it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any questions?
Well, it's this plus the rolling of House of Art that we did
The
up
survey-
Border Patrol. Yes, sir.
So the survey and engineering of the detention basin at the airport that we're mandated to put in.
Right.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. 2019-020 Twin Towers Memorial Project.
This is a pass-through. The Rotary got this grant, but it has to be paid to us because we're the government and we're passing it through.
And then I will, John, if it's okay. We've asked them to install security cameras down there after the damage to the one over in York Township there. And they've agreed to do that. Off the top of my head, it might be $8,000–9,000. Whatever it is, they said as soon as they got this reimbursement, then they turn around and write us a check for whatever it is to put security cameras there. We have to run a power pole out to the pavilion or power access to the pavilion, then the cameras. But for all the effort and money that's gone into this, we want to protect it. So it's not currently cambered.
Questions?
Don't put that in, but.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We have 1988 fiscal year 19 CDBG allocation grant application.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. So this is to apply for the Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Allocation Program. It's a 2-year program, so it's $75,000 each year, $150,000 total. We've had a couple public meetings already, and the application is due June 14th. We have listed on the RCA is the list of activities, code enforcement, It's been a really good source of offsetting general fund dollars for Community Development Department to do proactive code enforcement in the LMI areas of the city. Public transit as usual to help offset part of our cost for public transit at the cities. We've got some park improvements that we've been working with Jansen and Pat to kind of figure out, where can we spend this money at park and LMI. Fair housing is normal, administration, and then we're looking to do $30,000 to help fund a update to the comprehensive plan for the city of Medina. Since it would be using potentially CDBG dollars, we would just have to make sure that there's an explicit section in the comprehensive plan about low moderate income area planning, future planning. So the application is due in June, so we recommend, I would ask for the emergency clause so that we can get this, be able to apply for it once we get approval by ordinance, so we can get it into the application deadline.
No, I don't know if anybody else has had, people talk to them about the transit. I mean, they cut some routes and stuff, and I know we gave more money. I guess we can allocate it however we want to allocate it as council. So, I mean, I don't know if anybody had any other issues with the transit and the way the county has changed it a little bit, and, I think a lot of people rely on that to get somewhere, but I don't know what they contribute. I think the county contributes 45,000. Is that?
The county contributes, I believe, 150,000. We contribute about 45,000 in total.
Oh, we contribute the 45.
City doesn't. So this money through the CDBG grant is a fourth
Portion
of
of
what of our total portion, and theirs is multiples of our total portion.
But do we know any more about why they've been cutting routes and they've been doing a couple of modifications, I guess?
I think Nino serves on the board, so he might be better, but I know they cut some of the loops because there just wasn't the ridership to justify it. We have, as we've had needs in the community for like on-demand and things like that, the new director seems to be on top of those things, and they're trying to make accommodations. They like to have 24-hour notice, but then sometimes, something happens, somebody wakes up, they're sick, they didn't know 24 hours ago. And they've been much more accommodating in the change of leadership down there. Nino, I'm not sure, anything else?
That was correct, Mayor, and if I may interject, we have a meeting set up May 20th, the three service directors and Shannon to, he wants to bring back some of that, some of those services, so there's going to be a conversation and pretty much briefing us on what's up and coming.
Anybody have any questions or concerns of any other issues in the low-income areas that, I remember we used to do curb cuts, I think Mark Colzar was big on that, doing the handicap curb cuts.
I think we're pretty much caught up on that, aren't we, Patrick?
Most part.
Pretty much.
I mean, I drove through my ward, and there's some that probably need replaced in the next few years, but.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, there are some, we're probably getting to the point where we need to start relooking at some that were done 20 years ago.
Right.
I know it's been challenging, we've had them to actually find locations where they're not.
No complaints from any of those? Okay.
Move to approve with the emergency clause.
Second, with an emergency clause?
Any further discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. 1989 rezone of 216, 222, 226 South Jefferson Street from an R3 to an MU. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. As you said, this was a project that on April 11th of this year went to the Planning Commission. The applicant, which is, all that information is in your packet, requested a rezoning of the properties at 216, 222, 226 South Jefferson from R3 high-density urban residential to MU multi-use. After reviewing the applicant's request, staff's analysis, the Planning Commission did not recommend the requested rezoning to City Council, as a motion to recommend approval failed 2-3. So for Planning Commission, that has the effect of the recommendation not to rezone.
Paul?
Everything Jonathan said was correct. The applicant did put forth a very good presentation. However, there were several residents, those who live on the street and those whose properties abut the properties. They were asked us to not rezone it, to keep the area residential. And as I looked at it, as a member of the board, Some of the properties were residential, would remain residential. This was just for, as 3 of the 6 properties, I think. I forget the exact number. And when I looked at the whole picture, I felt that it was spot zoning, and if they wanted it to be multi-use, that we'd do the whole side of the street, since there are gonna be people who do continue to live it. And you look at the rest of the block, that continues to be residential. I voted to not recommend a zoning.
What were the other discussions at the planning commission? Like, what were people for it? What did they talk about?
There wasn't any real conversation for it. There was a lot of conversation against it in the meeting.
Denny?
Well, I have the utmost respect for Dino and Dom and the entire Carino family. I think that your business is such an asset to the city, and my family, my entire family, I know utilizes what you know. I know there's other areas in the city that have small office spaces with parking lots behind it and so forth. So I mean, I understand what you're asking for. The only reason that I probably will not vote for it is the city's invested so much into the parking deck. And that was such a controversial decision to make at that time. Now it was one of the wisest decisions that we've made. With that being right across the street, and I understand that you want to have some, I think 3 of the houses you want to turn into office space. That again is basically right across the street, and I do understand the concerns that the neighboring residents have. But in my no vote, I hope you understand that it's nothing against you or your business, because I think it's one of the most, with the most longevity of success as far as your type of business in the city of Medina, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
Jonathan, I just have a few questions for you. From the administration, I mean, when you reviewed it, what were the issues that you saw?
In reviewing it, and this was vetted extensively, looking at the proposal and the policy documents we have and the regulatory framework that's being proposed, we did recommend approval, changing of the property from R3 to MU. It's consistent with the goals of the comprehensive plan, future land use map. It's consistent with the MU zoning district. The MU zoning district allows low-scale commercial, but also still residential, so the properties it just opens the market value of them and the market demand for these properties. It makes sense as a transitional area between C2 in the historic district on the west side of Jefferson into the R3 fully residential area to the east. So it was a recommend rezoning of the property to.
What about the
R3 to
issue of
MU.
rezoning it to only 3 properties out of the 6 or whatever, only a portion of the street? Because usually the overlay district in the corridors we have, like on Liberty Street, Washington, not Washington, Liberty mainly, I think is all MU with an overlay, and this doesn't fall within the overlay as a side street, but how do you only rezone 3 of the properties without rezoning all of them?
The MU district doesn't have a minimum district requirement, so that's usually is codified in zoning codes as kind of an item to be explicit about, if you want to have this zoning district, you need to have this minimum district area.
So you can
we
just
we don't have that in the code. Like I said, as a small unit transitional, we have areas of very small amount of MU, just a block away on the north side of Washington, going up to 2 properties that are on the frontage of East Liberty. It's a relatively small area as a transition point between the downtown historic district into the residential areas to the east. I don't view this as a spot zoning because it's slightly more intensive commercial use, but still very low intensive commercial use is permitted by the MU district. If they were looking to do industrial in the middle of here, that would fall in within that kind of general idea, even though it's not a, we don't have a codified definition of spot zoning,
So all the rumors out there that we've heard, they're gonna tear down the houses, they can't tear down the houses.
They cannot tear down the houses under the MU zoning, because the MU zoning is very explicit that the intent of that zoning district is to allow for flexibility of use of of areas that are residential character. And part of that residential character is the existing houses. Under the current R3 zoning, the houses could be potentially demolished with a demolition permit request, and as long as they meet the procedural and submittal requirements of the demolition permit, we would have to issue it.
Now, the 3 houses that are there now, they're all resident, I mean, are they residences?
They've
or-
been residentially occupied pretty much their entire existence.
But once you change it to MU, then they could be changed to business.
They could, low-intensity office, retail, restaurant is a conditionally permitted use, you can't have gas stations, you have a small convenience retail. But it could still continue to be, it could also be a residential occupancy again.
What's the biggest change then, if by rezoning it from an R3 to MU is the biggest change that they can pave the whole backyards? That's the biggest change?
That would be the biggest functional change from R3 to MU.
And what's the setback between the residential properties? How far is that required to be if they do a paving back there? Is it 20 feet, 30 feet? I mean,
The minimum rear yards, the minimum setback is 5 feet.
and can that be modified?
5 foot between the proposed parking area and the.
Because that
rear
doesn't seem like it's
property
far
lines.
enough. for-
They do have extensive, there is the screening and buffering requirements of chapter 1149 of the zoning code, which requires extensive landscaping and.
Well, how much
buffering.
can you put this as 5-foot table? How much landscaping can you put in here?
Well, there's options, there's distance and
Right.
landscaping versus fencing, solid fencing and landscaping, which was part of the BZA request that had happened the same evening, so.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, Tony Vacanti with Tucker Ellis Land Use Council on behalf of the property owner. With permission of the chair, I'd like to, if it's okay, I'd like to just give a brief
Sure.
explanation of what we're trying to do and have some materials
Sure.
as well. Here with me is Mr. Dominic Carino. He's the authorized representative of SDSS Properties, which is the property owner. To answer the chair's question, we have proposed as part of this a 5-foot landscape buffer in addition to a fence. So not only will there be screening, completely screening the parking lot from the adjacent residential properties, which is not currently a requirement, there will also be a board-on-board fence to protect those residential properties. With permission of the chair, I have some materials, some visuals too. I'm a visual person. It's okay if I hand them out.
And while you're handing those.
Yes.
Those out, I mean, I did attend the initial meeting that we had, and the residents' concerns, and I don't know how you could get around that, or if you'd want to get around that. The initial concerns is if you have a dentist's office there or a lawyer's office, and after 5 o'clock, that the patrons from the restaurant would be parking over there. And I think that was some of the main concerns that was expressed by, some of the residents there, and I don't know how you could prevent that.
Well, my parking problem isn't after 8 o'clock. My parking problem is from, 11 o'clock to about 7:30, 8 o'clock when the library closes. The library right now, when they close, I have plenty of parking.
Right.
So I don't see my customers using the across-street parking because I will have enough of what I have now. It's just right now I'm being squeezed at my dinner time and my lunchtime because of the library using my lot. So I don't see that being used too much as an overflow.
Well, and not to interrupt you, sir.
No, that's fine.
I can tell you that, I don't know how many times, and again, my family and I, we frequent JoJo's and Dominic's on a weekly basis and love the place. But I don't know how many times I dropped my wife off at the door and drove around the block 3 times to wait for a parking spot to open up. And as I'm doing that, and luckily that I am smart enough that after usually the second time I realize, oh crap, there's a parking deck right there. And I pull in there. So when you say that the you might only have people that's gonna be using it from up until 7:30, 8 o'clock. I still think that if we could just advertise more, maybe a signage that would say if the parking lot's full, there's the parking deck. My concern is, and I think it's a valid concern for the residents, that there's gonna be, you know, late at night, there's gonna be cars parking back there.
Well, the parking deck issue is, yeah, if it was always sunny out, it was always a nice day, like today, people are not gonna park in that parking deck to come to eat. And it's been like that for the whole month of May so far, winter. So, Denny, they just don't use that.
Yeah.
They don't use that parking deck. They just won't, and it's been there for
Well,
5,
and
6
like I said, I'm guilty of
Yeah.
the same thing. I drove around waiting for a parking spot, and then, you know, eventually that I have one over and use the parking deck. And again, maybe just, and it's the same thing with mall areas. You know, people drive around, you know, for 10 minutes to find a parking spot closer to the store that they want to go to instead of walking for 2 minutes. But maybe signage would, and like I said, I do, and one of the reasons that I'm not supporting it, or the main reason I'm not supporting it, is because the parking deck is there and the residents' concerns of your patrons using the lots behind those houses.
Well, I think this is like two separate issues. I mean, I do own the restaurant across the street, but these 3 houses I bought under the assumption that in the master comprehensive plan, that they were going, that I could do a commercial building. And I can tell you, it's very hard to rent these houses. I have to go to municipal court tomorrow to evict somebody. It's hard to get my rent, it's hard to get good renters to rent on that street. I didn't do it to be a landlord, I did it for commercial use, to, you know, to drive business,
Sure.
work business to my area. So we're talking, you know, Dominic's across the street, and these 3 are like a separate, you know, it's a separate deal. It's a whole 2 corporations, two separate things. I didn't do it for the parking, I did it for an investment I can buy at residential price, but I'm getting commercial property.
And you're losing money, correct, Dominic?
Yeah.
Right, as residential?
Yeah,
Okay.
right now I am, yeah.
And I understand that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, absolutely. If there are any questions, please. Again, Tony Vacanti here. This is a very important issue for my client, and it does raise some very substantial legal issues. I know there's some lawyers on the board, so I'm going to speak a little more legalese than I normally would. But we are seeking a rezoning to mixed use or multi-use, as your zoning code calls it. This proposal is supported by the comprehensive plan, which was legislatively adopted. It's supported by the planning staff of the city. It is supported by good planning practices. My client, before investing in these properties, went to the city, did review the comprehensive plan. These properties were identified for future rezoning as mixed use, and in reliance on that, proceeded to close on those properties and engage in this process and procedure. As my letter that you all received indicates, courts have routinely indicated that it is proper for residents and property owners to rely on the comprehensive plan in investing in properties, because there should be a reasonably likelihood of rezoning in conformance with that. Some of the legal issues here, we're dealing with constitutional property rights, and there are 2 aspects of that. First, there's a substantive due process. Anytime this council acts, it's subject to the Ohio and U.S. Constitution. First of all, substantive due process. Any denial of rezoning or imposition of zoning has to substantially advance a legitimate governmental purpose, and it can't be arbitrary and capricious. That's where the role of the comprehensive plan steps in. More sophisticated cities like Medina go forth and produce a separate rational study of land use, which Medina has done, to provide the rationale for zoning decisions. So right now, this comprehensive plan supports what we are proposing. That study's already been engaged by the city and promoted. So to deny it, our position, it's arbitrary and it raises constitutional issues. The flip side of that is there's also a regulatory takings aspect here. Whenever the government regulates land, to the extent it regulates the land and devalues it to such an extreme measure, it could constitute a regulatory taking of that property. And again, that's where the comprehensive plan comes in, because it provides a reasonable balance between private property rights and the government's interest of regulating the public interest. That deliberate study has been done, and I would submit to you, by denying the proposed rezoning, it really puts my client in a hardship, both economically, because there's very limited economically feasible uses, as Jonathan had noted in his report, because of the configuration and the small nature of these properties, but also just the fact that it doesn't make much sense. We recognize there were some objections that were raised, but as Mr. Carino indicated, those objections centered primarily on the C2, which is a more intense commercial district across the street, Dominic's and JoJo's. That's a separate issue. These properties, as you'll see the site plan in there, we want to maintain those residential structures. Right now, under the current zoning, we can pull a permit and demolish those. The whole purpose of the mixed-use or multi-use zoning district is to allow the maintenance of these residential structures, but the city has recognized that in this area, it's unlikely that there's going to be a residential demand, because primarily these properties are across from commercial. Jefferson is a commercial corridor. There's heavy truck traffic that goes up and down it. So in order to maintain the residential character but allow for an economically feasible use, this mixed-use or multi-use zoning designation was arrived at. By allowing this rezoning to go through, you're actually protecting these properties, because as it stands right now, we have the right to tear it down. Not threatening that, but that's just the reality. So what we believe what we're trying to do is actually for the betterment of the community. Mr. Carino has invested over $2 million in this corner of the facility. He's invested in over $300,000, I believe, in acquiring these properties for multi-use in reliance of the comprehensive plan. And not only is it supported by the comprehensive plan, by also the spirit and intent and the purpose of the multi-use zoning designation, which allows for a transitional zoning for more intense commercial uses, which exists on the west side of Jefferson, the C2, to the residential uses, which exist further east of Jefferson. This is a perfect type of transitional zoning. So it buffers and mitigates some of the impacts that the residents were complaining about Dominic's and JoJo's, quite frankly. It also makes sense from a planning standpoint. Just very briefly, I just want to highlight some of the materials that I provided you. In the packet of materials, under tab 1, you'll see some aerials. And I know you're all familiar, but Dominic's and JoJo's are over here on the west side, and the 3 properties are over here on the east side of Jefferson. These 3 properties are all across the street from C2 commercial properties. They're not across the street from residential properties. So that's what makes these properties unique, probably more unique than the other properties down Jefferson Street on the east side, quite frankly. And they're also across from mixed use, across the street. There's a small segment under the zoning map, it's mixed use. So when we talk about spot zoning, there's a precedent that's been set. I don't believe it's spot zoning either. I agree with Jonathan. It's a perfect transitional type of zoning. So at least 216 is going to be near across the street of current mixed-use zoning. If you look at tab 2, you see the 3 subject properties here. Again, this character, this residential streetscape is going to be maintained. Under the current zoning, these can be leveled. So it actually promotes what the city was trying to promote. Tabs 3 and 4 shows the landscaping plan. Mr. Coyne, with the buffering that you had mentioned a concern about. Also landscaping and lighting plan. Those are tabs 4 and 5. Excuse me, 3 and 4. Tab 5 is the zoning district map. You'll see the subject property with an X, it's circled. You'll see there are a couple properties across the street that are mixed use, that's the blue. You'll see throughout the city, there are various locations to the south, to the north of the subject property, to the west of mixed-use zoning. So historically, it hasn't been an entire block zoned mixed use, and that's because it is a transitional type of use, as Jonathan had mentioned. And then under tab 6, you'll see the future land use map on which my client relied. And you'll see the subject area circled, and on both sides of Jefferson, you can see it's proposed as mixed use. And in conversations with the city, and in reviewing the comprehensive plan, that's why my client moved forward to close and invest on these properties. The other pictures that I submitted outside of the packet, it just gives you more of a flavor. You'll see the 3 properties that my client owns. Across the street, you'll see the 3 commercial buildings that they are immediately across the street from. So this isn't changing the character at all of the subject area. The second picture is just the opposite view. You'll see the 3 subject properties across from 3 commercial properties. Again, this is a commercial corridor, as the council is well aware. The next page, it's Dominic's here. This is the view immediately across the street from 216 Jefferson. So as you can see, it's not a residential character. This is a prime location for mixed-use office, and that's what we're trying to promote. Next page is the view across the street from 222 Jefferson. Again, as you can see, all commercial properties with an alley. Again, it's more commercial in nature, and this is a perfect transitional use. And the last page shows the view across from 226 Jefferson. Again, both commercial buildings. So I really ask that council remain open-minded. We're willing to work with the city. We try to work with the BZA and Planning Commission to, try to address some of the concerns. We acknowledge the concerns that have been raised, but with all due respect, they relate to C2 properties, some of which have been zoned that way and established that way since 1978. And there's a limited amount of what we can do. As this council is well aware, in order to attract commercial and office tenants, parking is critical. Parking is critical. Not to say that tenants wouldn't use the parking lot, but in order to attract, parking garage, but in order to attract top-notch tenants that the city wants to attract, it's important to be able to advertise and market that you have property, which is what the zoning code contemplates. There are no restrictions on the parking. We're fully compliant under the zoning code, under the mixed-use requirements. We're willing to go above and beyond on some of the landscaping. And by allowing this rezoning, you're actually forcing us to maintain the properties and maintain that residential character. So from a tax standpoint, revenue standpoint, from a property tax standpoint, from a aesthetic standpoint, and from a proper planning standpoint, we really ask that this council really consider this. There are substantial legal issues. Mr. Carino wants to work with the city as a member of the community. We don't want to be in an adversarial position, but these are very important issues to my client, and he has expended a significant amount of money in reliance on what this city has already advertised, what it would be willing to do. So appreciate your consideration of this. We're here to answer any questions that you may have.
Sorry to be the
No,
pain.
no, not at all.
If it would be approved, is there any way that your establishment would be willing to say if in a period of time you've leased out all 3 properties for businesses, which we would hope that you will, but say one is a lawyer, say basically that their office hours are going to be from 9 a.m. till 7 p.m. Would you be willing to put up signs saying, if one's a lawyer's office, strictly law office, parking, any other
Sure.
parking would be towed? I mean, I do think that if that could be monitored, that would be something that may help the residents.
Like I said, after that 9 o'clock hour, we don't really have a parking problem. Like tonight, my restaurant, the JoJo's, is gonna close at midnight. I might have, 20 people from 10 to midnight. Weekends are a little different, but what's really hurting me now is the lunch, dinner crowd, that I don't have enough parking to accommodate those people.
But so that what you're saying is though that you would then allow your patrons to use that parking over there,
Right.
Even though it may be a lawyer's office or a dentist's office or whatever.
Well, we would designate parking, so I'm gonna negotiate a lease with an attorney. He gets these 7 spots. This guy gets these 7 spots. It's like anything. Why does the library park in Dominic's parking only?
And I totally understand your
People will park where they're
predicament.
gonna get a spot, and believe me, I've learned that. I mean, I see it every day.
Thank you very much. I won't ask another.
And just to address primarily, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were at the hearing, primarily the concerns were the after-hour bar crowd, not the afternoon lunch crowd or dinner crowd. It was, the motorcycles, that type of noise and yelling, and actually some of the residential tenants, I believe, which this would address that issue as well, by the way. So I think to the extent that there is some overflow parking, because the city has set forth in zoning code, and it's in my letter too, that it wants to promote shared parking. So that I would submit that it's consistent with that. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we'd be willing to put up signs saying after
Sure.
such time, I don't know what time that would be.
We could put, I would put signs up for, the attorney's office, or, that's their parking, these are the spots that you are allotted.
Mr. Huber, have you had time to review any of these legal arguments that have been presented, or do we need to have more time to digest this?
Once again, Mr. Mendel has not said anything about the legal issues coming out of his office, except for a 2-minute conversation this afternoon. This is actually the first I'm hearing about this
Any
issue
of you able to
whatsoever.
participate in this, or is considered?
Sorry about that. Bill.
No,
Bill-
not
Bill-
you, Danny, I love it.
And also, Jonathan, just a couple quick questions before I open it up to Bill, because he has a lot of comments here. The property to the south is, I thought, if you look at the drawing here, there's one property that has a huge parking lot in the back. Is that the dentist, so is that multi-use, or how, did they get a conditional zoning, or what did they get on that?
When that one, I'm not exactly know exactly when it happened, but it probably happened when office was a conditionally permitted use in the R3 zoning district. That was removed from the code, I believe, sometime in the mid-1990s. So
Okay.
that's basically an existing non-conforming.
Now, if
Land
we
use.
rezone it to a multi-use, does that open up any conditionally permitted C2 uses to occur on that site?
Medical office, convenience retail are uses that are permitted in the
Okay.
C2 and the MU district.
Okay. Commissioner Lamb?
So anyway, Mr. Huber, explain to me what you're talking about. What did you say? I didn't understand what you were referring to.
I haven't heard anything about, apparently this is an issue that's been in the planning department going on for a month. Nobody's come over from planning department to law department to say a word about this till Jonathan poked his head in this afternoon and mentioned this issue. So literally, that's the first I've heard of it. Now, why that is, I don't know. Seems like this is something that a good department head would wake up and come over to.
I'm going to ask you to not say that in the public meeting, Greg.
But that's
You and
not
I
how
can
I
talk about it
feel.
separately. I know.
I
It's
don't
not
know why,
appropriate to the
I don't
setting.
know why I don't know what's going on with something like this when it's been going on for a month.
So anyway, no, I have a couple things. I don't agree with Jonathan's report. I didn't when I saw it before it went to the commission, for a number of reasons. And one reason, I guess, that concerns me right now is this is what frequently happens in public bodies when these issues come up. I fully understand the business side of what you're talking about, and that you have legal representation. And that the reference to the people that live in proximity to what you want to do have been referred to as residents' complaints. But there is no resident here, and there is nobody representing residents here to balance out this conversation, which is a failure of fairness to have a discussion that's, we got a legal dissertation from you, explaining to us what we basically sort of already know. But we have nothing for the support of residents here again. I don't know how many decades we have spent trying to maintain residential neighborhoods surrounding the historic district, but it's been a lot. And if you have a parking lot behind your house, you may decide that you no longer want to have a residential property, or you may decide that maybe my property is being devalued, or maybe you want to get legal representation to come in and speak to how you view this issue. And the comprehensive plan, and Greg, you can tell me if I'm wrong, is the comprehensive plan codified?
I don't, we pass ordinances to create the comprehensive plan. It's not the law of the city in terms of zoning, it's just a plan.
Okay, it is a plan, and I mentioned to the President Council before the meeting, I have a comprehensive plan that I have marked with about 32 or 33 notes that are notes where we have not followed the comprehensive plan. And much of it, I think, was detrimental to the development that we did because we ended up doing things that were not good for the city, but I think harmed the city. So I can find you over 30 places pretty quickly where we have not followed the comprehensive plan, because in my view, as a public official, a plan is a plan, and unless you codify it, it is not law. And if somebody wanted to test that, well, that would be, that would be up to them to try to do. But I don't think, I don't think that that there can be an argument for parking. When I think one thing you said was you can't have a good business or you can't have office without parking. Well, I don't know, if I look at the historic district and I look at the businesses that are in the historic district, most of them actually have no parking. They have zero parking, but people generally find a way to get to them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be working to expand the buildings in the historic district. Further, it would make no sense for us to continue to think about developing the property where the theater was into condominiums or apartments if in fact we are going to take away possible residential properties that have already been built that surround the historic district. The integrity of the residential property and the property that buffers the historic district is essential, in my view, to the continued success of the downtown. Surface parking, which we demonstrated by the fact that we're committing over $3 million to building another parking deck, rather than what the former Ward 3 councilman wanted to do, which was build surface parking. And we said, no, we don't want more surface parking, because surface parking takes up valuable tax space. So until we have a balanced presentation, you will never change my mind. And I would like to see that the residents of this city get the same fair, level playing field as somebody who is in business. Businesses are important, I understand that, but there's nothing for an individual that's more important than their home. And to say that doesn't really matter, you can put a 5-foot buffer up or 2 fences or plant a tree, that to me doesn't cut it. And that's a position that I will take, and maybe further than that as well.
If I may.
Maybe, I mean, what is it you want to add? You've already given us a whole lecture on the law.
Well, first of all, I did. I want to mention also, as part of this process and procedure, there will be a public hearing before City Council.
You know what?
Where residents will
I
be
know
notified,
there'll
and
be a
there will be
public
that
hearing.
opportunity.
Got it.
We're dealing with my client's fundamental property rights, which needs to be balanced against residential concerns. I wasn't dismissing
You mean
them.
against residential property rights?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Good.
The residents don't own my client's property.
Absolutely not.
And the city's gone through a rational study identifying mixed use as an appropriate designation for these properties, because it's an appropriate, from a planning perspective,
We've gone through a lot of
transition.
studies, and if you want to look at them all, I'd be happy to show you what we have and haven't done, because a planning document that is not codified, I don't believe is going to stand up.
Okay. The case law said in my letter, and what would be the point of a comprehensive plan then?
I have wondered many times, what is the point of many plans that municipalities do?
Yeah, and to the extent the city's not following it, and there are many instances of it, I would just say that exposes the city to substantial liability. And again, my client, we don't want to get an adversarial, but I have to represent my client's interests. I'm telling you, that's very concerning from a property rights standpoint. That is very concerning, what I've just heard. And I just ask that you keep an open mind.
I
That's
have
all.
an open mind, because I've had the same open mind I've had for decades. But to me, if I show up here with an attorney, or somebody shows up with an attorney, and then says, I don't want to have it be an adversarial thing, and I'm like, maybe, I didn't bring an attorney.
has every right to bring an attorney. These are, we're asking for legislation, we're protecting fundamental property rights. I'm sorry that my presence here,
That's fine.
Please
I'm here
don't
till
take that
7:30,
against my
so
client
I can be
that I'm
lectured
here.
for another half an hour if you want.
Okay, well, let's move on. Bob, do you have? any comments?
I think without the obvious further discussion, we need, both as a committee and with administration, that we table it and take some more time to look at it.
I would agree.
I agree. All right, well, let's do that so Mr. Huber has a chance to brush up on it and get some more information about it, so he can advise us as our legal counsel for the city of, some of the issues that were raised by the property owner's legal counsel, so we can, better make an informed decision about what the facts, at least from the city's perspective, would be. So, I don't know, I don't really even think we had a vote on it this evening, because we're gonna have a public hearing on it anyway, so I think we'll get more information, and maybe at the public hearing, we can at least have that information available, so we can understand a little bit more what's going on before we have to take a vote on it. And when would the public hearing be, Kathy?
It's June 24th.
June 24th public hearing? So that should be enough time, Mr. Huber, for you, is it not? Okay. All right, well, we'll move on then. Thanks for the information you provided
No,
us.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
And,
Thank you, members.
We'll review it, go over it, and then at the public hearing, we'll probably have more information and probably more people attending. So we'll hear what's going on with that plan.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then we got 1990 MCRC Program and Activity Rate Change Proposal. Mr. Reg, you're back on again.
Thank you, Mr. President. This request is to update the rec center's program and activity rates. I've got Christy Mopes here tonight, our finance assistant, to discuss this more in detail. What we're doing with this.
Our original proposal was passed in 2002, and it was last updated in 2008. We just kind of go through it every few years and make sure that the rates we are charging are in accordance with the ordinance. The first section is just all of the per hour programming charges for all of our everyday programs that you see in our brochure. The rates that we've outlined here are just maximums. We have no intention of charging or increasing our rates at this time. We just want to be covered for the next few years in case we do raise rates. The original ordinance is 25 pages, so this one has simplified it greatly. We're down to 3 or 4 pages here. Like I said, there's no current plans to raise rates, except perhaps our basketball, because it's such a popular program and we're running out of space to run it. So, and then the second part of this is right at the very end of the 4 pages. The special events rates. When we had our audit this year, it came to our attention that we had not had any ordinance about our rates that we charge for our special events, like the fireworks festivals, food trucks, things like that. So we wanted to get it in writing that we would have a sliding scale with a minimum and a maximum daily charge for all of those events, just to keep in compliance.
So the changes you're requesting gives you a range. I guess I'm trying to get a little confused. Are you saying, I'm trying to read this and there's some stuff crossed out? and-
Yes, those are the old rates, the red ones are the new rates, so.
Oh, they're
That's
not
our
colored.
maximum
You might not have
hours.
color.
Ah, I don't have color.
If we have an hour-long class, we can charge up to $8 for a member or $10 for a non-member.
Okay, and then that's the limit. You can, whatever
Right.
below that, you can pick and choose. We have no say of say, hey, we don't want you to go below 7, you guys make the determination.
Right, yeah.
on what you want to
Rather
do.
than going back every,
But you only can limit it at 10. You can't say, well, we want 12 now.
Right, no,
Okay.
that's what we're doing now. We're saying we're going up to 12 for some things, so.
Well, I guess with the changes in the hourly rates and the changes in costs and expenses go up, I mean, this is only makes net, I mean, you have to, unfortunately, we can't live at 1925 prices. That would be good if we could, but.
We're at 2007, 2008 prices right now. so.
I get it. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Do, can somebody help me understand, go to the basketball where it was $40 for a season and now it's $100 and then 50 to 125. It helped me understand the difference between the competitive b-ball league and then the youth league and what that means, 100 per season versus
Usually
40.
the competitive leagues would be ones where we would play against other recreation centers. We have not typically done that. When they wrote this was 2002, and we had no idea what programs we were going to offer, so they just gave a huge range. We haven't actually done some of these, so Right now, we're just doing like youth camps and things. We don't really consider our basketball a tournament or a league yet. It's more recreational.
So then, right below that, where it went from 40 to 100, that has nothing to do with the general rec league basketball?
It could, if we decide to do just a general rec league. We've kind of considered what we've been doing, the youth teen sports, because there's a lot of training. So they do several weeks of training with skills and drills and things like that before they start hitting the teams against each other. And it doesn't really, I guess it's kind of like a tournament at the end to teach them how tournaments are run.
I'm just trying to figure out, like, when would you be charging, when did you charge 40 that now you'd be charging 100? And can you give me an example, or are you not using that one?
We're not really using that one. I guess, I mean, the kindergartners, because they don't really do anything competitive, maybe they're, $40 or $60 just for the few weeks that they play. We've kind of based it on a per hour, and if you take the number of hours that they are there several times a week for the whole 10 weeks of the season, it would be much higher than that, so. We base it on what we need to cover the referee costs and all of the.
So, I mean, if you had like a youth, like you said, the kindergarten comes in, you're gonna charge them $100? I mean, you're not gonna have a
We don't
season.
yeah, right. We wouldn't have to charge them that. We could go with per hours. For the
But-
kindergartners, they only play an
But
hour
you're-
at a time.
Well, okay, I'm confused, because per hours is crossed out under youth b-ball leagues.
Right, because there's a whole nother page that would be youth or teen sports that's $6 per hour.
So that's what you're talking about, they did fall under the sports on the next page.
Right, it's more like drills and training.
Okay.
So
Okay.
just wherever you classify.
I got it, because it's not a league, you're not competitive.
Right, we're not
doing-
traveling places. There's no prizes.
Questions, Bob?
So 2008 was the last time these rates were looked at?
Yes. Yeah, because we maximize, we go high so that we can post for a while there.
Thank you.
We don't come back and change it all the time.
I'm good.
Jim?
I do want to ask, okay, so then go down to the program category, special event vendor fee.
Yes, that's all new.
And that goes from $10 to $500.
Right.
Give me an example of that, because that is a huge
Puppy-palooza. Like if we
range.
have Puppy-palooza and we have 10 vendors out at the pool and there's maybe 100 people come, we're not going to charge a vendor $100 to put up a table there. But if it's, say, a fireworks festival or some,
food trucks at the
huge
outdoor
event
pool,
where we're going to have
we'll be able to charge more
thousands of
for-
people, we can charge more. So it's going to be based on attendance, cost of running the event.
And those are maximums, so it's not that we would get to that every time, it's that we want the ability to.
And who's going to make that decision, whether it's a $10 or $500? Like, what's the?
Usually
Yeah, right there.
Right, we go by profitability. With any
Yeah.
event we run, we do a program proposal where we put in our estimated staffing, the costs of things we need to rent,
The
things like that.
profitability sheet that we fill out, plus we check with other entities, other facilities that are doing the same thing. The food trucks in other cities are X amount of dollars they charge for vending, we go with those rates.
That just seems like an awful lot of discretion from.
We run
Do you want me to make one?
little dive-in movies,
Well,
where
Mike, I
25
think somebody's
people.
gonna come and say to you,
Right.
how did you pick 30 this time and this group got 50? I'm trying to protect you a little bit, that's why I'm
Right,
wondering
it's
if the rec center advisory is gonna have any say in this, or?
It's
We
something
can-
that they don't designate, but we can ask if that's something you want us to run by them. They're advisory capacity only, we can ask them for approval recommendations. if that's-
I guess there's history too, you're just not making it up every year, like one year you charge 100 for one event,
Right.
and the same event next year you charge 300, I guess that would be more problematic.
Right.
Well, and that's what I'm trying to
ran-
protect, that it's gonna come down to one person making that decision.
Right.
We could take it to Board of Control, we don't mind, because we usually know what we plan on charging months in advance. When we put out our program brochure 3 or 4 months in advance, we have to put the rates in there, so that'd be no problem to take to Board of
Okay,
Control.
that's why I just wanted, just so that it's not all one person where somebody's gonna say, boy, that's really discretionary.
I'd be the one to get in trouble for sure, yeah, it'd be me.
Danny?
No, fine.
Paul?
As long as they keep within the historical bounds too, and just say inflationary increases. I think that should allay some of Jim's concerns.
Okay. All right, any other comments you guys have?
Thank you, just appreciate you looking at it.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 1991 Amendment Number 11 to Delta Airport North Detention Basin. Patrick?
Thank you. We are required to install a detention basin out at the airport. We've been required for several years, and trying to get grants and whatnot, never successful. So we're pushing ahead with at least the design part of it right now. This involved us hiring 2 consultants. One of them was approved, Rolling and Host of our Board of Control this afternoon. They're going to do the surveying and engineering for the design of the detention basin. Second one is Delta Airport, who's our airport consultants. They will be preparing and submitting some FAA forms that are required, submitting a safety phasing plan, as well as a categorical exclusion. Their fee for this work is $19,000.
Questions?
Can I have a lake?
I guess not, because if you do the FAA, it's gotta be a lake built a certain way.
Yeah, there's with birds, they don't want anything to be an attractorant, right, is the term they use. And I should say, I think I put on there, the account to be determined. Not sure where the money's coming from.
But this is something we have to do, right?
Right.
Yes,
Yep.
we've been,
In fact, the last 2 hangars that were built subject to this being put in.
Right.
Question?
Move to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. 1992, accept the ODOT resolution regarding zoning requirements for State Route 18 project. Patrick, this is you again.
thank you. This was submitted to us by ODOT, the State Route 18 project, which starts basically at Albert Drive and heads east all the way to Nettleton. That portion that's in the city, they're asking for us to pass an ordinance. They're getting started with their property acquisition, the right-of-way purchases, which is a good thing. That means the project's getting pushed forward. And what this ordinance in their mind would do is when they go out and start negotiating with some property owners, it gives the property owners a sense of, it confirms that they're not going to be, if they lose some property, they're not going to be suddenly in non-compliance with our zoning requirements. I think John looked at it.
Yep.
And I don't know that it has a big impact.
No, the plans that Pat has has received from ODOT already, which, you know, could be subject to change.
Could change, yeah.
But as they show now, the actual physical land takings won't create any substandard setback conditions or minimum lot area standards or anything. So it's something that won't have any actual effect on the ground as we look at the plans now in comparison to the zoning code and past development approvals. But it may not hurt to have this. I think moratorium sounds kind of a strong word, but.
Well, 2 questions. How does it affect those who the taking creates a safety issue with respect to that? And this doesn't cover anything like some of the businesses maybe along the corridor are required to have right in, right out onlys. How does this affect those properties? Because there's a couple businesses in the city there that they may take away their, like, I don't know, the hospital has 2 stoplights there, but I think that there's a couple.
They're not,
Yeah,
they're not taking property from like many areas in the city. Really, it's the only one that's affected, and correct me if I'm wrong, Donna, but is that condos off of Foot Road that circle down.
Right.
I think that's really the only impact.
Glenshire House losing a little, and 2 of the lots on Glenshire Lane, the single-family cul-de-sac, are losing a little sliver of their frontage on Route 18, but it doesn't change the minimum lot size. It still complies with minimum lot size of the zoning district and setbacks and everything, so.
What about
I think
the-
the only commercially developed piece of property, commercially developed and occupied, is the hospital along the corridor. I think it's starting at Albert.
And
then
it has 2 stoplights, and those stoplights aren't going either. Are they gonna get rid of the
Now,
stoplights?
remember, inside the city, there's really not much widening. It's basically a reconstruction. The widening starts as you approach Foot Road. So there's not a big impact in terms of changing the footprint of the road in the city until you get out maybe within 500 or 1,000 feet of Foot Road.
Okay. I was just worried about
Which is in the township.
the lands. Well, I know the township with the church and all, I mean, you got all those, you got Light by Suma, but then you got all those businesses between, leading up to 71. And if I saw that plan correctly, they want to eliminate a lot of,
That's true.
I mean, that's gonna be a bigger issue, I think, for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Because that's, you could really affect a business if you take away their access.
Well, we sell that on 42 here with the shopping center.
Kind of problematic.
paid a lot of money for that.
Yes, it costs a lot of money for that. Any questions on that?
You mentioned Grandview Lane, a couple properties there. I mean, it's awfully tight there, it looks like. I mean, how much of an effect? It's still gonna be within the requirements, or is that where the,
There's actually the one occupied house, which is at the northwest corner of Glenshire and Route 18 or Washington, West Washington, has a 80-foot plus setback from the south property line along Washington. I think the widening, just kind of measuring off of not the scale plans, it's maybe, the actual land taking is like, I think 6 to 8 feet off of that 85 feet. And the minimum required front yard setback in the R1 zoning district is 50 feet.
is that 6 to 8 pretty consistent out the foot road? Or is it
I
varied?
mean, within the city,
It widens
yeah.
In the city it is, but as you get towards Foot Road, you're leaving the city and it does get wider.
That's actually what I was mentioning, the condos on Grandview. It looks like they've come up pretty close as it is now, so.
The widening for Glenshire Hollow, for the lot, for the frontage along Washington, so their entrance is off of Foot Road for their development.
yes.
That one's wider, it's maybe, it looks like probably 10 to 12 feet, but they have a significant 50-foot setback plus an additional setback that the buildings were set back from that minimum 50-foot for the current property lines.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Eric?
Just one concern I have is if we do adopt some sort of ordinance, giving them a free pass, if you will, what safeguards can we put in this to make sure that it's for this project only and they can't go and take it somewhere else down the road, or the state can go in and say, oh, they said we can have this, but let's take this, for example?
I think we would have to add that, and when we can, they submitted this to us as a recommendation. But we can massage the language however we want to.
Okay.
Mr. Huber, did you review this language?
No.
So it'll be subject to Mr. Huber's review and approval. Yeah, because it says in there, the city declares a moratorium upon enforcement of zoning requirements located in the city to landscaped area between the right-of-way and developed portion of the site, which I don't know if that's necessarily true, the whole site, and number of parking spaces, setbacks. I mean, there's some other issues that go along with it that, I mean, if they take most, I don't know, again, there's nobody taking a lot of spaces, even on, I don't even think the hospital will be taking spaces from the hospital in the front there. I don't think so. But the setbacks and stuff, I get it, but the other things may be problematic depending on if we want to make sure other things are held accountable, like you're talking about, not, it's just related to, my guess would be setbacks and stuff, not, well, hey, I don't have to comply to the zoning, I'm gonna put a shed here now, my shed,
That's why I want to keep it specific.
And it does kind of do it somewhat specific. And the use of temporary lighting during construction. So they don't want anybody complaining about the temporary lighting. But I guess we have to have Mr. Huber review it.
Again, we're under a time constraint on this?
No, this has been going on for how many years now?
This project?
Yeah, about 10?
Yeah.
Yeah, about
It
10. I don't
still
think-
doesn't have full funding for construction.
Yeah, so I don't, so we gotta have, so why don't we do this, Mr. Huber, look at it again, then we'll bring it back, because we don't have to approve this now. I mean, we're not, we don't have the project's timeline not even.
They have started their right-of-way acquisition, but if they have to wait a couple weeks,
I don't think
The
it-
property to acquire.
I don't think that's gonna be interesting to see what happens. All right, so Mr. Huber, take a look at that, we'll bring this back and talk about it once it's reviewed and modified. Okay, then we got 1993, increased PO 2019-513, Ohio Regional Development Corp. fiscal year 2017 CHIP. John?
Yes, thank you. So this is for our existing CHIP grant. Ohio Regional Development Agency is our hired contractor to help administer the grant for the 2 years of the grant. So within that grant, they're going to be doing the fair housing training. So we need to add to the PO $2,000 to help to be able to pay them for that function. which is one of the specific functions on our agreement that we have with ORDC from last year when we hired them to be our consultant for the administration of the CHIP program. Thank you.
Questions?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Anything else to come before finance before we recess into executive session? Patrick?
Go over our
Oh, yes, go over your thing. We gotta get this done.
After our last discussion about the parking deck, council made a number of suggestions for changing the request for proposals for the second go-around. I tried to summarize those. I want to present them to you and make sure we're all in agreement going forward, because we're about ready to issue the second RFP, and make sure we have some support for it. I won't go word for word here, but just go over it quickly. The project parameters, we decided we want to still remain with 200 spaces minimum, with the caveat that those, to be counted as a space, it's got to be within the parking deck itself. It can't be, we had one of the proposals before where there were a number of spaces you had to get to through the parking deck, but they're actually outside the parking deck. We're saying those wouldn't count. The footprint, and I attached an aerial, with kind of an area marked out. It's basically all the city-owned property adjacent to City Hall, except for that 80 by 140-foot section along West Liberty Street. So basically, we're saying, put the parking deck wherever you want, however you want, as long as it's in that footprint. And then the orientation, previously, we had a basis of design, a preferred design, which was north-south. We discussed, obviously, the east-west, and we're saying we're not going to prefer one over the other. It's up to you. You're free to submit on whichever one, or if you want to do multiple, that's fine as well. This next point, we had a discussion about possibly maintaining some spaces throughout construction, and in the future, surface parking next to City Hall. And we discussed there were some hurdles with that in terms of building the deck. So what I heard, and maybe you want to talk about this a bit, was that we would say that we prefer to have those spaces, but it wouldn't be a requirement. I submitted this to Mr. Coyne, and he had some hesitation with that, and I think Greg does as well, so maybe we want to talk about that.
It's the last sentence. I don't think we want to tell anybody that the technical proposals include surface parking will receive favorable consideration. Because then if we get another design that we like better, and somebody has parking, and we're like, oh my, I don't want to be caught in a situation where we're, use that against us. So I think the committee should decide, that's my opinion, of what to do. Don't put language in there that pigeonholes you anyway.
Question I had, should we just eliminate any reference at all to it, just leave it out?
No, I think the surface parking thing is fine. It says we'll be expressing our, as a desire, but it's not a requirement, just to see what you get.
We'll end it there.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
Scratch the second sentence.
Scratch the second sentence, yes.
That's scratched. In terms of brick accents, we're going to add some more language emphasizing the importance of that. Also, we understand, just so everyone knows, that all these guys would love to give us all the brick we wanted, but they're constrained by our budget. And we understand that for them to be responsive, they have to submit a project that's within budget. And that may mean that there might be very little, if any, brick accents. That's just what we have to understand going into it. And I mentioned that next one. Cost proposal will be modified to require the design by enter costs for brick enhancements that cannot be incorporated in the base. In other words, as I said, if they submit a cost proposal, it's just a concrete deck to meet the budget, we would then have them give us basically an a la carte list, I guess, how much more it would be to add certain brick.
Because it all depends on what the look of the deck is and how many spaces are in a deck. I mean, that is the most important. But if somebody does it and does it all brick and the other people don't, well, then it's kind of.
We talked about, in terms of the different sides of the deck, whether or not we should say, well, the west side should be, enhanced more than the east side. We say we're not going to do that at all. We won't reference the one side over the other. Budget will remain at $3.8 million. That'll be published, and that's what they'll be required to meet. be considered responsive. And as mentioned, they could submit a project that meets that $3.8 million, would say, well, for 100,000 more, we can give you this more brick. We can consider that after we receive them. Design review and scoring. The old committee had 5 members. We decided the new design review committee will have 7 members, 2 of which will be members of council. And we also will try to include a local developer as an additional member. The other members were myself, Jonathan, who else is on? Chip Klinkenberg, a local architect, Leslie from the Historic Preservation Board, and John, Mr. Coyne, sorry.
I think it was Paul or Bill wanted to be on it, I don't know, everybody. You got only 2 that wanted to do it, I think, right? Yeah. So at the end of the meeting of the parking lot, we'll have a duel.
With what? What will be?
Bricks.
Bricks.
Okay, then you.
The next item, this is more for the committee. We had a couple developers that showed us a beautiful rendering of the deck, and we all loved it, and they said, well, but that's not what you're getting. We want them to show us, for $3.8 million, what do we get?
Right, that's a good idea.
Scoring will be the same, 50% technical, 50% cost. The cost score, this was kind of important because it changed things, but the cost score will be based on cost per parking space, and that parking space will be within the deck. If you have 200 within the deck and 25 outside the deck, you're only getting the 200 in the deck to come up with that score. And the design review committee will not determine any 2 proposals that are tied like we did the first time. We have the committee.
And what's the timeline on this? If we get this out this week, when do they turn it back, and when do we, because we're running out of time.
We talked about giving them 4 weeks to respond. Last time we gave them, I think, a little over 7.5 weeks. We figured we could cut that down because.
Is 4 too long, do you think, or what do we have to give?
The 2 that did not present an east-west proposal last time really don't have anything prepared for that, so if they wanted to do it, I think they would need to. They spend a lot of money putting this together.
So we'll give them 4 weeks, so that pushes us to the middle of June. If we meet then, by July 1st, we can have a decision.
Correct, yeah.
And then usually, they can start sometime in July, but it'll probably push it to February.
Yeah, we're into late winter time next year, we'll probably be done.
Or spring.
Or spring.
Is everybody okay with that?
No choice.
Well, I don't know, there's always a choice, but there may not be a good choice.
Well, there's always a choice. There's not a good choice.
That's right.
All right, dumb question tonight. Are we still mandating the entrance off Elmwood? We didn't tell them which way to orient it.
Yeah,
Are we
no.
still saying entrance off Elmwood?
I don't think we referenced,
We'd have
they
it
can if they
before.
want to.
Oh, we didn't?
No,
All of them?
we just see all of them had it, right?
Oh, okay.
We just let them give us what they think's functionally, because they're in the parking business, we're not. They can transfer.
The only other, just for your benefit, we've had it 3 or 4 different spaces in the proposal. We said it's up to council and they have the right to accept or reject. But we're gonna make it very clear that that design review committee is just recommending, it come to the full council and they can take the recommendation or not.
Good job. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? All right, send it out. All right, we have a motion?
I'm going to make a motion that we move into executive session at 7:13 PM to consider the purchase property for a public purpose. The fair disclosure of this information would give a fair competitive bargain advantage to personal and private interests of that versus public interest to include the mayor, the law director, and Jackson Worley.
Second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Starcher?
Yes.
Shields?
Yes.
Coin?
Yes.
Center?
Yes.
Rhodes?
Yes.
Yes.
We'll be recessing executive session to discuss the items that Mr. Shields mentioned, reconvening in the finance, not taking any action, and then adjourning finance, going to council. We are recessed.